Well, today I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Mark Karris. Dr. Karris has a doctorate of psychology in marriage and family therapy, and he is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And he has the privilege of having been previously on my YouTube channel talking about this book, The Diabolical Trinity: Healing Religious Trauma from a Wrathful God. Today, we're going to be talking more in the space of another book, but potentially with some overlap to
Mhm.
this one as well. And that will be his 2020 book, Religious Refugees: Deconstructing Towards Spiritual and Emotional Healing. And I will just let everybody know I've got my Lucky Charms shirt on today because as we record, it is St. Patrick's Day.
Nice.
So, Mark,
I
thanks for
think I
joining
got a
us.
little green. Is there a little green in here? Can you
It
see
it
it?
looks green to me. It looks green. It's kind of an
Okay,
olive.
got it.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I heard an interview with you recently, and it revealed that you like heavy metal music.
Yes. This is so intertwined into my story, my conversion story. But yeah, I was in a progressive metal hardcore band at the time, and playing in the tri-state area. Yeah, and opening up for some national acts, play guitar. I think that actually saved me as a young 15, 16, 17, 18-year old, as one who was suicidal and cut myself and pretty dark. But that actually set up this profound conversion experience in the Oneness Pentecostal church. I still met Jesus within that context, and that completely changed my life. It was a powerful experience. I don't know if you want to hear, but I was in a,
Yeah.
um, all by myself. I was, you know, it was in it was almost like this, not forest, but woods kind of area. And I was crying and I said, God, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And if you're real, show yourself to me. And I just had this profound sobbing of love and something I've never felt. Consider myself a master deconstructionist, but I still can't deconstruct that moment in some subsequent moments after that. So I have a profound love for Christ, for sure. But it also put me in the context of a oneness Pentecostal church, and that's a whole cultish story to tell as well.
So, you said you're a master deconstructionist. What is deconstruction for you? Obviously, within a lot
Sure.
of contexts, deconstruction for some people is definitional as to who they are and what their journey is. Maybe similar to you. For other people, it's a four-letter word and it's a toxic thing. So, what is your
Yeah.
understanding?
Well, it's definitely, although I've read some Derrida, it's not full on sort of Derridian pure, deconstruction in that way. But it was really, when I say that, I'm thinking of, and this is almost like a psychology kind of frame. I was so hurt by life and have come through so much trauma, both familial and ecclesial, that I started to question everything, to the point of like nothing became off limits, which is why one book is on prayer, one book mentioned divine violence. Everything is on the table. So when I say master deconstruction, I even tried to deconstruct my conversion experience, and I can't, because it feels so transcendent. I couldn't have just mustered this up, this depressed, dark hued tinted glasses young man, to experience that level of love. And even as I talk about it now, it's just so profound to me, to cry and to feel something that, even after all I've been through in the Christian faith, it's still the anchor. It still anchors me in this Christian tradition, though much larger, because it's the core, and I think the spirit of Christ that transcends a religion at this point, and that gets into panentheism and some wild stuff. But yeah, so that's a little bit of the story there.
So, I know that when people talk about their personal subjective experiences and the unique
Yeah,
interiority of those experiences, some people will resonate and they'll say, you know what, I know what you mean, or I have a sense of what you mean because I had something like that. Other people are going to roll their eyes and
yep,
say, I mean, it's just a subjective experience. You know, you could have that, and people have that for all sorts of things. what would you say to the skeptic person who's kind of
Hmm.
dismissing, first of all, that experience?
Yeah. I would say I don't blame you for being skeptics. I think it was Bruce Epperly who, in reference to atheists, say, "Tell me about the God you disbelieve in." Um, so I understand. I'm skeptical about everything. So I'd be like, it makes sense you'd be skeptical. And I would also say, all I could say is this is my subjective experience and take it for what it is. I'm not using it as a foundation to bolster some theological claims. I'm just saying phenomenologically, this was my experience. And I'm even open. And I could say, listen, I've deconstructed my story. There's people in other faith traditions who have similar conversion experiences. So again, I'm not saying it to say, well, that must mean the Christian tradition is true. I'm just saying this is my experience and it's profound and it's within a Christian context with this Jesus character being interrelated into it. And that's all I got. I'll hear your story and I don't mind sharing with you mine.
Think, for example, of Cat Stevens off the coast of California in 77 or 78 and almost drowning and having a religious experience that he believed was the God of Islam, Allah, and he became Islam after that, I believe. Is that right?
Ah, mhm, mhm.
Yeah, and so, like you said, other religious traditions. Do you kind of process? How do you process the fact that people do
Yeah,
have seemingly the similar religious experiences of the divine, of absolute love, in with different
yeah.
theological frameworks and traditions altogether?
Brilliant conversation around the topic of religious pluralism. I've thought deeply upon it, and I'm probably going to come out with a much more expansive and maybe liberal view. But I must posit, if I look at that religious experience and it's ubiquitous, I'm not a fan to say, well, Satan comes as an angel of light. That's what I was taught, and that's just demonic in origin. That just doesn't land for me. Um, I have to believe that it must be, and again, this is my perspective, it must be that the Spirit of God, which is everywhere, omnibenevolent and omnipresent, must have something to do with some of these experiences. And it doesn't mean that the I think of all these different religions potentially as games with their own, chess, their own pieces and their own names for all of these things. They're all, this is the elephants, well, this is the trunk. No, it's not the trunk. For me, it's the I'm just thinking that the spirit transcends all of that, and God can work amidst us all, apart from the labels that we want to give to certain the dressing of it all. It's not to say that every theological proposition in these communities is true, but I just think the spirit of God reigns on the just and the unjust. And I think that's really true, that God is everywhere and God is at work in every moment, even in the atheist's life, even in the Muslim's life, the Buddhist's life, the Christian's life. So that's how I understand this wild, loving, the wild goose, the Holy Spirit.
There's I think of like Matthew, for example, Matthew 12:26, when Jesus is casting out demons and people say, well, that's just you're doing that by the power of the devil. And then he says that if Satan is driving out Satan, he's divided against himself. How can his kingdom stand? The point being, it doesn't make sense when I'm doing good to attribute it to
Mhm.
evil. And would it be fair from your view
Mhm.
to say if a person has a religious experience,
Mhm.
uh, and that experience produces what we would recognize as fruit in their life, an increased love of neighbor, for example, then it's just wrong to attribute that to evil in the way that your old mindset or my old mindset might have done, right? With these very binary
Yeah.
categories. If it's not from God, it's from the devil, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the common fruit test. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. I also know people who've done psychedelics and, have come out to be more loving. I just think evil, it's not a word I would use, but I would say, oddly enough, maybe some good can come out of something that's has a veneer and that's covering around it that's not godly. And sometimes good things can come out of that. How do we make sense of that? I don't have the answers for all that, but I think there's some wisdom to say that God, who is love, who is everywhere, who is at work in this moment, in each moment, lowering all of us, all of creation to down to the quarks to greater levels and experiences of truth, goodness, and beauty, that God is at work in everyone. And it's wild to think about because are you saying the person who just committed an evil act, God is simultaneously wanting some good, or is that work to have that person experience some good in his life in the next moment? That kind of love, where that's just bizarre to me. Where if someone did something wrong, I'd be like, screw you. I mean, I don't want anything to do with you. But that's just God. God must transcend us in that way. And I think God does in that loving, expansive, powerful, luring kind of way. It's inspiring, actually.
I was just thinking about it. How do you think if someone were to say, "How do you define God right now?" What would you say?
Oh my gosh, the $1 million question. I was just asking myself this. I've been listening to a little of Bernardo Kastrup in Analytical Idealism. I'm just thinking that God is not just the ground of all being, but being itself in such a wild, mysterious way that nothing could exist without God. That everything that exists, well, in God, we all live and move and have our being. So I just see God as this expansive, like God is not the air. Like people, well, who is God? And they're like, well, the spirit, like pneuma, like wind, like we're trying to give words to this thing that's everywhere. But so that's how I'm experiencing God is everywhere. I don't know the what God is, made of, but everything that exists, even down to the quarks, is due to us being in God in some way. Consciousness itself that has a flavor of love, but it also is God is so wild that God uses death. I know this is so weird, but this God who is in the mix of all of it, that doesn't like, well, that's too dirty or that's death. But God is somehow in the mix, bringing life through death and death to life, and in such a wild, wondrous way that I can't even put words to this level of beingness. So that's where I'm at, which then does a lot for me because it says, oh, God must be at work and is in at work in the Muslim exists because of the beingness of God and is at work in this like so the sacred becomes everywhere and in the trees and in my animal and in my child and in somebody who doesn't think and act like me, the imago Dei, in some profound way that much different than in an out crowd, rampant tribalism. I have to immediately judge you that God has nothing. Like I was taught in my Pentecostal tradition that, well, hey, well, if they're experiencing love or some healing, no, no, that's not God. That's demonic. Like God has, because Christ, if you have not the Spirit of Christ, you are none of His. And they would appeal to that verse, saying, no, no. And they would take it to the extra mile. If you didn't speak in tongues, then you didn't have the Spirit of Christ. And clearly you're not saved, but they were big on any other tradition besides the Christian tradition. And a modalist, which is the one of Pentecostal church, is demonic in origin. And that caused a lot of profound fear in me. I remember walking in my classes and I would like plead the blood of Jesus Christ on every doorway, thinking I was in some Harry Potter film. I mean, I looked at everyone as in or out, demon or good, or it was wild. I just don't think that's healthy or true at this point.
The fundamentalist kind of mindset is very binary between good
Yeah.
and evil. And I remember actually 40 years ago, when Striper, remember Striper? They're still around,
Oh
but they were
yeah,
this
yeah,
Christian
yeah.
heavy metal band back in the day, and they were just going on tour, and they were playing a city, and they were featured on the evening news, and the person on the evening news interviewed the concert goers in the lineup, and one of them said, "If you're not singing for God, you're singing for the devil."
Yep,
And
I
he
heard it.
meant that. Yeah, he meant that in the sense that quite literally, like if you are not singing Christian lyrics, then you're singing to Satan. And at the time, it
100%.
made sense, but it creates this binary thing where, like, the Carpenters or ABBA, like some of my 70s music, go-to music.
Mm.
I do like heavy metal as well. Like I went to Kerry King in and Municipal Waste in January.
Oh
That was a
wow.
great show. Yeah. So I do like that too. But I'm a man of many tastes. But
Yeah.
this meant that by the way, I mean Tom Araya from Slayer's the
Mhm.
Catholic, right? So the world is more complicated than we ever recognized. I saw Megadeth a couple years ago, and there
Yeah.
were a couple Christians. Well, the one guy
Dave
left, a
Mustaine.
Lutheran. Yeah, Dave
Dave
Mustaine, and I
Mustaine's.
forget the
Yeah.
guitarist guy who left. They had a falling out, but he was a Christian
Yeah.
Lutheran, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
the point being,
Yeah.
when you end up thinking that anything that is not explicitly Christian is now a tool of the devil, that creates a pretty fearsome base because now you're always worried the devil's always out to get you. And so I can understand the allure of kind of the panentheistic framing that you give of thinking everything is divine, and it's all communicating God in some way to us because it removes that sense of fear and
Mhm.
and the toxicity that can come from viewing the devil as
Yeah.
hiding under
Yeah.
every rock.
Yeah. And again, just to clarify, not everything is divine, but everything is in the divine. There are clearly things that are not divine in origin, certain attitudes and beliefs and practices. It doesn't necessitate that all, because that gets into some of my pushback, and I have some, religious plurals folks, oh, whatever you believe, that's fine for you. It's all true. It's just different paths to the divine. I'm thinking, I don't think Jim Jones and that cyanide, strawberry lace cyanide, or
Yeah.
Haley's Comet and people killing themselves because they thought they were gonna. Some things are not divine in origin, but everything and every human and creature has its origin in the divine. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that you've talked is to be very familiar in a lot of the creation theology and feminist theology of the last 40 years, viewing the world metaphorically as God's body. And some of the appeal in those models of divine relation to creation is that I think it's fair to say that a lot of the traditional classical theist conceptions of the divine's relation to creation err on the side of transcendence, we could say. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, in a Thomistic account, God has no real relationship with creation. God cannot, as the unmoved mover, be in any sense
Yeah,
moved by creation.
impassible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just
Mhm.
and then you end up with an impassible and immutable God who just does not relate to us in any conceivable way that we might recognize. So I certainly
Yes.
understand and am broadly sympathetic, I'll
Yes.
say, with
Yes.
the appeal of a sort of panentheistic model. Can I ask you, so you've had this
Yeah.
religious
Yeah.
experience as
Mhm.
a youth, incredible experience of love that still impacts you to this day. You're then led into, I'm not going to say you're led per se, but you end up in a very unhealthy church setting. And I think this describes so many
Yeah.
people, their experience. It's God who's amazing, but it's his people they have a problem with. So just tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about how you process thinking about the degree to which religious communities that express their ostensibly they're following this source of all love, how they themselves so often fail to embody it.
Well, I think it's across, again, I always try to take a compassionate view across all religions, traditions. I don't know if it's true. I always hear there's about 35-ish thousand different Christian sects and denominations. We're all trying to figure it out. And sometimes the divinity gets funneled through the prism of unhealed and wounded and traumatized human beings and comes out in really dangerous and traumatic ways. So I just it's we're human. We've been singing songs and having rituals and thinking we know what's going on with the divine in the afterlife for since we're conscious. So I just take a compassionate lens. That's what we do. And does that point to some anthropomorphic tendency within humanity to perceive God in our own image? I think it's a worthy conversation to have. But what is the truth within all that? Well, the Apostle Paul, to my understanding, only quoted Jesus about 2 to 3%. It's a number that I found as I was researching, doing some writing, and so he was basing his stuff out of his own experience. I think experience gets a bad rap, but he wasn't sitting there quoting Jesus all day. He was a profound God lover who was trying to figure things out through his own Jewish tradition and coming up with pretty unique, wild, wondrous theologies around that. I think that's what we're all been trying to do. And that's why you could put two people in a room and rarely will you ever believe exactly the same thing. Even if you believe in Christ, someone believing in Christ in Latin America could be very different than how I believe, or someone in Korea. We all believe in Jesus, but how that is expressed in our image that we have in our mind when we think of. That's why it's so full of metaphors. A lion, a king, the bread of life, lover, mystic, all kinds of different metaphors to convey this untamable, unboxable
And
Christ.
the beauty of metaphor, one of the beauties of metaphor is that metaphors are not exclusive. They're not like theories, where a theory is an overarching explanatory
Mm,
framework that excludes other theories, but a metaphor is I have a story picture and it's compatible with other story pictures and they're evocative
mhm.
and they're heuristic.
Yeah,
And yeah, it can be a plurality of them. So um, that's a few minutes. We got a few minutes left. A lot of people, when they hear deconstruction, they think,
yeah.
okay, that means you rejected Christianity, God, religion, etc. Many of those who use the topic mean something completely different. Like, no, I left behind a toxic theology and I understand God and Christianity or Christ better than ever.
Mm.
So, what do you mean then when you
Mm.
say deconstruction? Where does that place you now?
The unboxable, the unlabelable, the unlabelable. I don't even know. I prefer not to be boxed in. And this also gets into a model of human beings where we are multifaceted and we're not monolithic even within ourselves. So that's why I can say I have an atheist part of me. I have a fundamentalist Christian part of me. I have a liberal part of me, a progressive, and a process theology. I have many different parts of me that may seem strange to some listeners. I just think it's more honest about the complexity, so I don't have to say, "Well, I'm all this" or "I'm all that" to fit somebody's need for me to. Well, who are you? No, no, no. What are you a? Are you a Christian? Well, what kind of Christian? I think sharing in that way, by the way, also comes from an approach of therapy called internal family systems, which has some great research around and a lot of books on. It's something that's very appealing to me, the complexity of who we are. I'd rather listen to like Randall, I don't even know who you are. I'd rather hear your story, interact with the many layers and different parts of who you are, and trying to capture the big essence of that rather than pigeonholing you into a particular label. That's just my sensibility around that. I wish we would do more of that as human beings.
From the background I come from, and I suspect it's similar to you, when you think of truth and religious truth, what you would think of are doctrines that correctly describe reality. That's what truth is. So if I have more truth, it's because I believe the right doctrines. I understand truth very differently now, and it's not to diminish the importance of doctrine. I mean, I'm a trained systematic theologian with a PhD,
Mhm.
but nonetheless, I think that's a very reductionist understanding of what truth is, just to think about it as matching up your beliefs to reality. what do you understand truth to be?
By the way, before I answer that, hey, disciples of Jesus, what's define the Trinity? Put it in a few sentences for me. Are you kidding me? No, that's not going to happen. Who do you say that I am? There's still like these bumbling disciples who are trying to figure stuff out. And so, come on, people. The notion that we have to have it perfectly right in our doctrine.
Just yeah, just to follow up on that, like Jesus after he rose from the dead, the story goes that he spent 40 days teaching the disciples before he ascended to heaven. So that was, a pretty unique theological formation. And then when the apostle Peter preaches in Acts 2, he says, "This Jesus, whom you crucified, God has made Lord." Now, if I were just to preach that unadorned in churches today, there will be a lot of churches that think you're denying the Trinity and affirming adoptionist theology, because that is
Mhm.
not reflecting clearly the later, like Nicene doctrine of the Trinity from the fourth century. So 100%, I agree with you that even after 40 days of Jesus' intensive seminary formation, they were preaching what could be argued to be a sort of proto-adoptionism, which certainly was not fourth century Nicene Christianity. So,
I
so
hear you.
yeah, doctrine, it's
Yeah.
not enough. So tell me, what is it? What is truth?
Okay. One more example though. The guy in the cross, right? The dude,
Right.
he was a thief, right? He's like, how much theological doctrines does this guy have? Now, today you will see me in paradise. Whether or not people think he's, went to heaven and be with Jesus, seemed like he was sort of in that trajectory. Again, no, I say that knowing, like, I'm not trying to diminish the need for doctrine. I just epistemological humility goes a long way with me. Listen, hold what you hold. I would rather you do it with love and sort of, hey, this is anyway. That goes a long way. Truth for me though, it I used to say truth is a person and truth is Jesus. That is sort of the progressive liberal thing to say. But truth, yeah, but truth could also be, in vaccines. Truth is everywhere. Truth is what is true. I think Arthur Holmes said all truth is God's truth. So maybe there's a sense in which, yeah, I can, what is it called? Soft postmodernism. Yeah, maybe there is objective truth. And I think even in idealism, there's a sense in which this is the airplane and this, we're all, our senses are figuring out the signals, right? But beyond that is the real truth. And maybe there's truth to that. I just don't know if I can come into full contact, but I think I can come into greater degrees of truthfulness. And yes, I could say that God ultimately, as spirit, is truth in itself, in beingness. That's probably where I would land.
I love the Abraham Kuyper quote. There's not a square inch in the whole of creation of our existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not say mine. The idea being
Mm,
that if Christ is truth, that's what you proclaim, then you have a sense of a cosmic truth embodied in a human being.
mm.
And so you should never fall into, again, that kind of binary thing where we limit truth. And St. Paul, if I'm don't love, I'm a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. So the truth has to be embodied in us, right?
No, Randall, you need the absolute truth and stop
Yeah,
leading people astray.
yeah. You
It's
got to get
so
the
it's
doctrines, get all the doctrines right.
I can vacillate because I can hear, like, I get the fundamentalists. Like, no, no,
Mhm.
no, don't give me your philosophical liberal. No, it's either black or it's either true or it's false, Mark. Which one is it? Is Jesus God or is he not God? Is the Trinity true or not true? Ah, it's so lazy of thinking for me. I think I care more about truth in the way that I'm trying to open it up in a much more expansive way than to pigeonhole it in such, black and white. Where's the kaleidoscope? I think we can use it.
To go back to and close on this with First Corinthians 13, now we see darkly as through a glass, then we shall see face to face. So we don't have to bear on our shoulders knowing all the right doctrines, right? It's like we will know someday we will know what is true, but for now, are we people of truth. Mark, it has been great. I want to thank you very much
Awesome, Randall.
for joining us in this discussion. And everybody, I've linked to Amazon below where you can take a look at some of Mark's books as well. Thank you for joining
Awesome.
us, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Randall. All right.